Some places, they just hold on to energy. Dark, heavy energy. It seeps right into the wood, the stone, the very soul of a building. We were called to investigate a family home out in rural Ohio, a place that looked normal enough from the outside. But inside, something was terribly wrong. The family, the Millers, had been living in fear for months. They spoke of a presence, something that watched them from the shadows. They felt its cold breath on their necks in the dead of night. This wasn't just a haunting. It was an infestation. An unseen house guest that refused to leave, its intentions becoming more sinister with each passing day. The air in the house was thick, oppressive. It was hard to breathe, I'll tell you that. We knew this investigation would be different. We set up our base of operations in the living room. The family had already moved out, staying with relatives. They just couldn't take it anymore. The father, a stoic man named David, told us the activity started small. A misplaced object here, a faint whisper there. Things easily dismissed at first, but then it escalated. Doors would slam shut with violent force. Full-bodied apparitions would appear at the end of the hallway, only to vanish when confronted. He described a tall, gaunt figure, a silhouette of pure blackness. It had no features, no face, yet he felt its malevolent gaze burning into him. The energy in the house was, palpable. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, the wind pushing you closer to the fall. Our initial sweep with the EMF meter confirmed our suspicions. The readings were off the charts, spiking erratically in specific areas. The nursery, the master bedroom closet, the top of the main staircase. These weren't normal fluctuations from wiring or appliances. This was raw, concentrated energy. A spiritual vortex. We placed static night vision cameras throughout the house, hoping to capture what the family had been experiencing. The silence was deafening, a heavy blanket that seemed to absorb all sound. But beneath that silence there was a hum. A low, vibrational frequency that you could feel deep in your bones, a sign that we were not alone. The house was awake, and it was watching our every move. As night fell, the atmosphere grew even more tense. We began our first EVP session in the living room, the heart of the house. We called out, asking for a sign of any spirits present. "What is your name? Why are you here?" The only response was the creaking of the old floorboards and the sigh of the wind outside. But then, a distinct cold spot formed in the center of the room. The temperature dropped by 20 degrees in a matter of seconds. We all felt it. It was like stepping into a walk-in freezer. The air grew heavy, and the feeling of being watched intensified tenfold. It was a direct response, a clear sign that something had acknowledged our presence and was now making its own. The first few hours, they were a waiting game, a tense, quiet vigil. We sat there in the darkness, our senses on high alert. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind made us jump. Then we heard it. A faint sound from upstairs, scratching. It was a rhythmic, deliberate sound, like fingernails dragging slowly across a wooden door. It was coming from the nursery, the one room the family's youngest child refused to enter. We grabbed our gear, full-spectrum cameras, digital recorders, and SB7 spirit box, and made our way up the creaking staircase. The air grew colder with each step we took, the oppressive energy becoming almost suffocating. The scratching sound stopped the moment we reached the top of the stairs, as if it knew we were coming. We entered the nursery. The room was small, with faded wallpaper depicting cartoon animals. But the cheerful decor was a stark contrast to the chilling energy inside. The EMF meter in my hand screamed to life, the needle jumping into the red. It was centered on the empty crib in the corner of the room. We stood in complete silence, our breath misting in the frigid air. We asked again, "Is there a child spirit here with us?" We aimed our recorders at the crib, hoping to capture an electronic voice phenomenon. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, a single clear word came through the spirit box, a device that scans radio frequencies. It was a child's voice, and it said, "Hide." The word sent a shiver down our spines. Hide from what? Or from whom? Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the hallway, right outside the nursery door. It sounded like a heavy piece of furniture had been thrown against the wall. We rushed out, flashlights cutting through the darkness, but the hallway was empty. Nothing was out of place. There was no rational explanation for the sound we had all clearly heard. It was a classic sign of poltergeist activity, a spirit trying to intimidate us, to scare us away. It was a show of force, a warning that we were treading in a place we didn't belong. The house was playing games with us. We returned to the nursery more determined than ever. We set up a motion-activated toy ball on the floor near the crib. If anything passed by it, it would light up. We continued our EVP session, asking more direct questions. What are you hiding from? Are you the one scratching on the door? The room remained silent, the toy ball still, but as we reviewed the audio from our digital recorder, our blood ran cold. Faintly, underneath my own voice, was another sound. It was a low, guttural growl. It was not human. It was something deep and menacing, an animalistic sound that seemed to emanate from the very walls around us. The child spirit wasn't alone. It was hiding from this. The family had warned us about the third floor, the attic. They said they never went up there. David had boarded it up after his wife claimed to see a pair of glowing red eyes staring down at her from the attic hatch one night. He told us the feeling up there was one of pure evil. He described it as a place where all the darkness in the house seemed to be concentrated. Against his advice, we knew we had to go there. This is what we do. We seek out the darkest corners to find the answers. We pried the boards off the hatch in the second floor ceiling, a cloud of dust and the smell of decay raining down on us. A rickety ladder unfolded, leading into a pitch-black void. Climbing that ladder was one of the most unnerving experiences of my life. The air that poured out of the attic was stagnant and heavy with the scent of ozone, that distinct smell of electrical energy. As I poked my head into the space, my flashlight beam cut through a thick darkness that seemed to swallow the light. The attic was a cluttered mess of old furniture covered in white sheets, forgotten relics, and thick ancient cobwebs. The temperature was at least 30 degrees colder than the rest of the house. It was a suffocating, unnatural cold that clung to you. I felt an immediate sense of dread, a primal fear that screamed at me to turn back. This was the source. We set up our equipment, including a full-spectrum camera pointed at the center of the room. The moment we turned on the SB7 spirit box, the responses were immediate and aggressive. A harsh, raspy voice exploded through the static. "Get out!" The words were filled with so much hatred, so much rage, it felt like a physical blow. The EMF meters in our hands were going wild, flashing and beeping uncontrollably. We were standing in a powerful vortex of negative energy. This was no human spirit. This was something that had never walked the earth in human form. It was something inhuman, demonic. It was claiming this house as its own territory. We tried to communicate further, but the entity refused. It just repeated its command, "Get out," over and over, its voice growing louder and more distorted with each repetition. Then, one of the heavy wooden chests in the corner of the attic slid several inches across the floor on its own. We all saw it. There was no trick of the light, no slanted floor. It moved with violent intent. This was a direct physical manifestation. It was an incredible piece of evidence, but it was also a final warning. We were not welcome here. The entity was demonstrating its power, showing us what it was capable of. We had found the heart of the darkness, and it was pushing back hard. Heeding the warning, we retreated from the attic, closing and reboarding the hatch. The energy on the third floor was just too volatile, too dangerous. So we decided to focus our investigation on the master bedroom, which was another hotspot of activity. The Millers had reported the feeling of being held down in their bed at night, a phenomenon known as sleep paralysis, but they claimed it was caused by a spiritual force. They had also seen the tall, dark figure standing in the doorway of the attached closet, just watching them. The room felt heavy with sorrow and fear. It was the epicenter of the family's personal torment, and honestly, the residual energy was overwhelming. But we were determined to understand what was terrorizing them in their most vulnerable moments. We conducted a provocation session. This is a controversial technique, but sometimes it's necessary to elicit a response from a dormant or intelligent entity. I stood in the center of the room and called out to the dark figure. "You like to scare people when they're sleeping? You think you're powerful holding them down? Why don't you try it with me? I'm right here. I'm wide awake." The challenge hung in the silent, cold air. For several minutes, nothing happened. The silence was almost a taunt in itself. Then, the closet door, which had been firmly shut, slowly creaked open on its own. A wave of intense cold poured out from the darkness within. We aimed our thermal camera at the closet opening. On the screen, a human-shaped figure began to materialize. It was colder than the surrounding environment, appearing as a dark blue and black mass against the warmer background of the room. It was tall and thin, just as David had described. It had no discernible features, just a solid man-shaped void. It stood there, motionless in the doorway, an ominous sentinel guarding a portal to somewhere else. We were all frozen, watching the evidence unfold on the camera's small screen. This was it. This was the entity that had been terrorizing the Miller family. We were face to face with the source of their fear. As we watched, mesmerized, a disembodied whisper was captured on our parabolic microphone. It was faint but undeniable. It said a single name, Sarah. Sarah was the name of David's wife. The entity was targeting her specifically. This wasn't just a random haunting. It was personal. The figure on the thermal camera then seemed to dissipate, fading back into the darkness of the closet as quickly as it had appeared. The closet door then slammed shut with such force that the entire wall shook. It was a final definitive act, a display of power and a clear message. The conversation was over. The presence had made itself known, and it had made its intentions clear. The rest of the night was eerily quiet. It was as if the entity had expended its energy and retreated back into the shadows of the house. As the first light of dawn broke, we began to pack up our gear. We had captured incredible evidence. Class A EVPs, the moving chest in the attic, and the chilling thermal image of the dark figure. We felt we had enough to validate the family's experiences and offer them some guidance on how to cleanse the home. Before we left, I decided to take one last series of photographs around the house, using a standard digital camera. Just a final documentation of the space in the light of day. I snapped pictures of each room, the hallways, the staircases. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was standard procedure. I downloaded the photos to my laptop in the van before we drove away. I started clicking through them, checking for light anomalies, orbs, or anything out of the ordinary. The first 20 photos were normal, just empty, sunlit rooms. But then I got to the last picture I took. It was a shot of the main staircase, looking up from the first floor. My heart stopped. I felt a cold dread wash over me, the same feeling I had when I first entered the house. The picture was clear, perfectly in focus. But it wasn't empty. There, standing at the very top of the stairs, was the figure. It wasn't a shadow this time. It wasn't a cold spot on a thermal camera. It was there, in full spectrum light, captured in a high-resolution photograph. It was tall and gaunt, shrouded in what looked like tattered black cloth. But the most terrifying part was that this time it had a face. It was pale and skeletal, with sunken black pits for eyes. And its mouth was open in a silent, agonizing scream. It was looking directly at the camera, directly at me. It wasn't just in the house anymore. It knew we were leaving. It had followed us. We delivered the evidence to the family, including the final, horrifying photograph. They never returned to the house. They sold it at a loss, disclosing everything to the new owners, who, to our knowledge, have never reported any activity. But that image is burned into my mind. Sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I can still see that screaming face. It's a stark reminder that when you stare into the abyss, sometimes the abyss stares back. And sometimes, it lets you take a picture, just so you never forget the true face of the darkness that exists in the forgotten corners of our world. A darkness that is very, very real.